Okay, so I want to talk a little more in depth about snap tie walls. We have never done one with CR. I don't want to ever do one with CR because that would mean that we're working on a really excessively sloped lot where we need to build a really tall retaining wall. Okay, so that's the thing with snap tie walls. If we are building a tall wall, we're going to use plywood forms and we're going to use snap ties. These are called snap ties. The other situation where we maybe get into using snap tie walls is if we were pouring a basement or something like that. And so inevitably, the question usually comes up in class like, why don't we have many basements around here? And the answer is because it's really expensive to dig that deep and get rid of all that dirt. Okay, and the next question is, well, why do people have them on the East Coast? So in places where it's cold, you have to dig below the frost line and place your concrete below the frost line. Okay. Sometimes that's 5 feet below the ground. Okay. 4 or 5 feet down, you're digging to get below the frost line. Because if you don't get below the frost line, the ground can freeze and heave and it can move the foundation. Okay. So in those places, you need to get below the frost line. So it makes sense if you're digging that deep already, let's dig another 2 feet deep and just have a basement. Okay. But we don't have that problem here. So we're not really digging that deep to begin with. Okay. So anyway, let's go over the steps about how we would form up a snap tie wall and get it ready to pour concrete. Okay. What we're going to do, instead of a monolithic pour where we're pouring the footings and the foundation all at the same time, usually the snap tie wall is going to be 2 steps. Okay, we're going to pour the footing first, and we're going to trowel that flat, and we're going to dip some rebar in it, some vertical rebar that are sticking up. Okay, and we're going to come back later and tie onto the rebar. Remember, on our perimeter foundation or on our slab, most of the time we're only going to have horizontal bar. And I said if we get above 4 feet from the bottom of the footing, then we're going to end up having to add vertical rebar because the height of the wall needs additional tensile strength to keep it from tipping over. Okay, especially if there's going to be dirt backfilled against it or something like that. So on a snap tie wall, if we're using plywood forms, we're likely going to be kind of tall. Okay, we're probably going to be tall, so we're going to need vertical rebar. All right. So we're going to have a footing poured. We're going to have rebar sticking up out of the concrete. There are some orange caps, some orange safety caps that you have to put on top of the rebar if it's going to be sitting around, if it's in that vertical position, because people can fall on the rebar and get impaled and get seriously injured or killed. Okay, so those orange caps are a 3x3 square, and there's a little pocket inside that fits over the rebar. So if somebody falls on it, they just break some ribs instead of getting impaled. Okay, so anyway, that's kind of a side note. So we've got that rebar installed, we've got the footing poured. We're going to create what's called a keyway. Okay. Generally, what we're going to do when we create that keyway is we're going to embed a 2x4 in the footing. Okay, so the top of that 2x4 is going to be flush with the top of the concrete footing that we've poured. And then after it's dry, we're going to pull that 2x4 out and we're going to leave a recess in the bottom of that footing. Okay, there's going to be a space that was occupied by that 2x4. It's going to be an empty space now. There's going to be a little channel in that footing now. What's going to happen is we're going to build our snap tie forms, snap tie walls. We're going to pour concrete in between those form boards, and then the concrete is going to fill into that keyway that we left where that 2x4 was. Okay, because otherwise, that wall, since it's not a monolithic pour, it could, under certain loads, push off the bottom. Okay, it could slide. So that keyway helps that entire wall lock into the ground. okay? All right, so let's say we are building, getting ready to build our forms. We're going to take a 2x4 and we're going to lay it on that footing. We're going to lay it flat on that footing, and we're going to maybe drill some holes and screw it down to that footing. Maybe we're going to drill some holes and nail it down to the footing. It's going to be temporary either way. That's going to be part of the form work, okay? Then we're going to get a piece of plywood and we're going to nail it to that 2x4, okay? We're probably going to build an outside corner with that plywood first. We're going to start on the outside corner, nail 2 sheets together, drop it down, and nail through the bottom of the sheet onto that 2x4 that we've attached to the footing, okay? The snap ties, these, and if you're having a hard time picturing all this, we're going to watch a video here pretty soon about snap tie wall construction, okay? So these are the snap ties here. It's a rod, and there are these little cones, and those cones help keep the snap tie from pushing through the form, okay? And then the rod continues through here, generally another 3.5 inches, and it sticks out, and then there's a special bracket called a whaler that tightens that snap tie rod up against this 2x4, okay? So there's 2x4s installed horizontally against the plywood. That keeps it rigid, okay? And then the brackets tighten up against those 2x4s, okay? These snap ties, they're similar to the wedge ties that we would use on a crawl space foundation, okay? We're going to build in a similar fashion to the way we were doing the perimeter foundation, in that we're going to build the outside first. We're going to put in all our snap ties, tighten up one side, put in all our rebar, and then we'll slip that next piece of plywood over these snap ties, put the 2x4 on, tighten it up with the brackets, okay? Imagine if we have an 8-foot tall wall that's 10 inches wide, and you build all the formwork first. How are you going to get in there and tie all the rebar up? So you build the outside wall, tie all your rebar, and you can hang it off these snap ties and stuff. It's pretty nice having these snap ties here. And then once everything's done, all the rebar is done, all the snap ties are in, then you're going to put that next piece of plywood over. Generally, these snap ties are going to go in every 16 inches. And when I've done this before, we would get, 4 or 5 sheets of 3/4 plywood if we were buying new plywood. And we'd stack them all up, flush them all up, clamp them down, and then we'd snap lines on the plywood and drill through 4 or 5 sheets at a time. And then that way, all the holes are lined up and all these snap ties are going to go in straight. All right, this is a little video of some different types of snap tie walls, and there's some naughty language in here, so feel free to cover your ears or mute your computer.
We got some forms. These are the John A brackets. And here we got the short end snap ties. John A brackets, short end snap ties. Over here we got the gates. It's the gate bracket. And they're put together with the loop ties. Got some hard-working men over here. Yeah. Working on the long end snap ties. Doubler, wedge, and whaler. Yeah. So that's put together. Long end snap ties. Those would be the double whaler with the wedge. Last but not least, your strip easy forms. that you'd be looking at for the straighties.
So I was able to stop the video before the curse word happened, and I was able to save everybody's ears. But that was obviously at like a training center where there were people building different sorts of snap tie walls as practice. Okay, and then I assume they're gonna go out in the field and do it for real at some point. But those were some different examples of snap tie walls. They were up about 4 feet. Generally, when I've done it, we've been up